Monitors coming out this year have been insane, and with the release of two types of 32-inch 4K 240Hz OLEDs, we have had options for endgame monitors. But both the MSI QD-OLED and the LG WOLED have pros and cons. I'm only going to go over what I feel is most relevant to each section, but do your own research into what suits you best. There are plenty of good videos out there to check out. Design-wise, the main difference I notice is the thick bottom bezel that MSI has. It looks incredibly clean, and when I'm using the monitor, I don't notice it, but it does pale in comparison to LG's really thin bezels. They also opted to not go for like a thick bar with their logo on it, which I thought looks great. I did notice the LG base is a little bit bigger and I have trouble fitting my mouse pad, but for either of these monitors, I do recommend mounting to free up desk space. The color difference between the monitors did feel minimal from personal use. They were near identical in the sRGB mode, and the QD-OLED was a little bit more saturated in the wide gamut mode, but I felt like I could only really notice it when I had both side by side. If I was just using one, I wouldn't really tell that the colors weren't punchy or not. Brightness also felt pretty similar. Sometimes the QD-OLED was brighter and sometimes the WOLED was better. The issue of raised blacks definitely appears on the QD-OLED with the windows open or the lights on. If I positioned windows behind my monitor, it became almost non-existent. But any light directly on the monitor definitely caused the black levels to raise. Personally, it didn't feel like the biggest issue because the contrast was still there. My issue was less with the raised blacks itself and more the pinkish hue that these raised blacks have. They can affect the colors of darker content and give inaccurate colors in those situations. But controlling the light is not too difficult, it's just something to be mindful of. The black levels of the LG are great and experienced no raising when it came to light on the monitor. But I did experience some weird behavior that I noticed with the LGs. I noticed raised blacks on situations where the monitor itself was getting brighter. I noticed the black bars would get very bright and then automatically go dark when the next scene came. Sometimes when replaying these same scenes, you wouldn't see that same black increase. I noticed this issue on the LG only half the time I replayed the videos, which makes me believe this is some type of firmware issue, maybe some type of auto brightness raising. But it was incredibly distracting and noticeable. I tried seeing if the peak brightness on high, low, or even off made a difference, but it didn't. When it comes to clarity, the arguments of matte versus glossy will cause wars. And after using both side by side personally, I think there are pros and cons to each. I think the matte coating is definitely not your average matte coating and is much better than I've seen on other monitors. I love the way matte can handle reflections of myself or the background whenever it's lit up. But my major issue is when a light source is behind you. If you have an open window behind you, it spreads the light out so wide that it's just incredibly distracting to me. For large light sources, I definitely prefer the glossy look, and I might be biased because I'm used to using my MacBook and my phone, which have glossy screens. I do think matte versus glossy definitely comes down to personal preference. I noticed the slightest sharpness difference in favor of glossy, but this is only visible when I'm viewing content which is incredibly sharp, such as footage from the A9 III. In gaming and normal 4K video content, I would say the sharpness is barely noticeable. But there is one more issue about the sharpness that I'm going to bring up at the end. One other key difference as well is the 480Hz mode at 1080p. I've played competitive shooters all my life, and I have to say the difference here is easily noticeable, especially when it comes to quick mouse movements. The smoothness is unreal, and it feels so much better than my 390Hz IPS monitor, not only because of the colors, but the response time of OLED itself. I think I play similar on both 480 and 240Hz, but it does feel like I have to think less when I'm on the 480Hz mode. The smooth motion helps my brain just adjust to where I'm aiming, but I would say for a lot of users, it's not a necessity. 240Hz is still incredibly smooth, and sometimes I just like playing on it because of the sharpness of 4K. But now that brings me to my final issue. When I was looking at each pixel on the QD-OLED and the WOLED, it was really hard to tell the sharpness difference even when I was up close. But for some reason, every time I used the QD-OLED for browsing and editing, it just felt more clear, and I couldn't put my finger on why. When viewing large chunks of gray or white content, I noticed that there was a little bit of a clarity issue on the WOLED. I had to really get close to see it, but the best way to describe it was it felt like there was a thin layer of oil refracting the colors a little bit. If you've ever gotten your phone a little bit oily, you've seen the colors separating. I noticed the bright lights on my desktop background linger when I switch to a full gray Chrome window, which is very concerning, but I'm not exactly sure what this behavior is. It's definitely noticeable, and it is a little bit distracting whenever you open up a Google Chrome tab, but I haven't heard other reviewers mention this. But this issue is not replicated on the MSI QD-OLED. Warranty is also a potential issue with LG not really being firm on whether burn-in is covered. On the other hand, the MSI offers a 3-year burn-in warranty warranty more than any other manufacturer. And I think lastly, the biggest issue is the price. The MSI in the US is coming at a staggering $950, whereas the LG is priced for $1,400. I have seen posts of people using deals and codes on LG's website to get their monitors for $1,000 to $1,200 after tax, which really does make these monitors competitive as well. Also, BH Photo Video has it listed for $1,300, which you can price match with Best Buy. Personally, I really wanted to love and keep the LG monitor. It has so many enticing features like the 480 Hz mode, the thin bezels, the built-in speakers, and even now I'm still trying to convince myself that the clarity issue is not a big deal. But every time I see the MSI monitor after using the LG, the uniformity makes a big difference. So for $950, the MSI QD-OLED is as good as it gets for me.